Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and all invited distinguished guests. On behalf of the Energy and Resources Institute, we welcome you all to the technical session on financing the implementation of the India Cooling Action Plan. I'm Ashmita. I'm joining you from TERI. Sustainable cooling presents a multi-sectoral opportunity to address the developmental climate challenges India faces. Rising temperatures and population growth are contributing to a steep increase in cooling demand, and India will require massive cooling infrastructure to fill the significant cooling access gap. Bridging the gap is essential for avoiding impacts on human health and productivity and job loss. So, keeping this in the background, the World Bank is organizing a final stakeholder consultation at TERI's flagship program WSDS this year under the Sheetal Alliance for Sustainable Habitat, Energy Efficiency, Thermal Comfort for All initiative to engage experts from multilaterals, governments, research institutes, civil societies in order to deep dive into the identified areas for ICAP. This will help in understanding the key financing investing opportunities and enabling policy environment to move towards thermal comfort for all. So, for our welcome address, we have with us today Mr. RR Rashmi, former Special Secretary to the MOFCC, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, and a Distinguished Fellow to TERI. Mr. Rashmi is an officer of the Indian Administrative Service, batch of 1983. He was India's principal negotiator for climate change negotiations under the UNFCCC for several years and was part of climate change policy making in India in the run up to and after the Paris Agreement. As a special secretary in the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, he was closely associated with the formulation and implementation of policy relating to climate change, pollution, Montreal Protocol on ODS, and environmental clearances, besides being the project director for Green India Mission. We're honored to have you with us today, sir. I would now like to call upon you to navigate the inaugural session on behalf of our audience.
Thank you very much, Ashmita, for the introduction. And let me once again, on behalf of TERI and all of you who are associated with this event and this session, welcome all of you to this very important session at the WSDS this year. You know, we have been talking about cooling as an important sector, as now pillars of our future actions as far as energy saving, energy efficiency, and now a comprehensive movement towards net zero goal is concerned. You know, the importance of energy savings was never in doubt. And so far, countries like India, particularly, I mean, I can at least speak about the progress made in India. It has done a remarkable transition or progress as far as energy efficiency is concerned. And that has happened entirely on the back of, improvements not only in terms of the technologies, but also in the kind of applications that we have seen, building consumer awareness, greater stakeholder participation, greater sensitivity to the need to minimize energy consumption. But now that we have a much stricter goal before us, India has announced a net zero goal in 2070. Some people might still say that it is very far out into the future, but it is an aspirational goal which India has now adopted, and that will slowly permeate it into its policies. There is a process. I understand a process that has been initiated to prepare a long-term strategy for development in India, and the Paris Agreement also talks about a low-emission development strategy. And the sectors which are going to play a very major role in devising this strategy, cooling happens to be one of them. Cooling is certainly a key area And fortunately, the government of India has recognized the importance or uniqueness of this sector, because the cooling actions don't take place in a particular sector. I mean, they are spread across buildings, agriculture, health, pharmaceuticals, energy, industrial establishments, so everywhere. So an integrated and comprehensive plan is important, and that's why it needs to be incorporated into a long-term strategy. Fortunately, the government of India did realize this much earlier than other developing countries did, and they came out with an integrated cooling action plan. Now, you are all aware of the details of the cooling action plan. It talks about the cooling, reducing the cooling demand, the refrigerants demand, the cooling energy demand, all kinds of things, and across different sectors. But the key the challenge before us is to devise a roadmap which makes it inherent in their strategy at all levels of governance, and not just it should not remain confined only to the policies in the center. The states in India, they are very important players. The energy consumption takes place largely at the state level. There are local governance units at the municipalities, then other stakeholders, which will also play an important role. So unless the policies, the regulatory frameworks, and the arrangements are established at all different levels, it will be difficult to make progress at a scale and in the time frame that we want to do. So that is the real challenge, and TERI is really, we are thankful, or rather privileged, to have the support of several institutions in this effort. We have been a partner with the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, who have supported many of our studies in this area. We are a part of the alliance of Sheetal, which Ashmita was talking about, and we have a long-standing partnership and support from the World Bank in this area. So we are all thankful to for their support in this area, for conducting research and also advocacy as far as cooling action plan is concerned. The World Bank has prepared a roadmap for this, and it will be a great opportunity to discuss the elements of this plan with all of you, with the people who hold the knowledge, the experts, and the interested participants. So with these words, I'll stop here, and I look forward welcome once again all of you to this session, and look forward to an enriching and constructive discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rashmi sir, for presenting your thoughts for the welcome address. I would now like to introduce Mr. John Roome. Mr. Roome is the Regional Director for South Asia Sustainable Development at the World Bank. Before this, he was a Senior Director of Climate Change. He joined the World Bank in 1989, working initially in Africa, and has since held various positions, including Operations and Strategy Director for Global Practices and Cross-Cutting Solutions. I invite Mr. Roome for inaugurating the event.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Ashmita. Thank you, Mr. Rashmi. Great to be here. As I said earlier, I would much rather be in the TERI grounds, sipping tea and actually talking with all of you in person. But if we can't do this, this is the next best alternative. It's actually interesting that a number of the points that Mr. Rashmi made are very similar to the ones that I would be making, which I think shows the alignment in terms of how a lot of different stakeholders see these issues. I think the first point to make is, and I think it's well known, is that climate change is going to lead to significant increases in heat stress in India. On average, many of the climate models have projected that the change in temperatures in India by the end of the century relative to the early 1960s could be as high as 5 degrees centigrade. But more importantly, maybe, climate models project that the wet bulb temperature, which is the measure of the effectiveness heat, could exceed the survivability threshold of 35 degrees in a few locations in northeastern India, and are projected to approach that 35-degree threshold in the RCP 8.5 scenario by the end of the century in a number of other locations. But even under the more optimistic RCP 4.5 scenario, vast regions of South Asia are projected to see increasing episodes exceeding 31 degrees, which is considered extremely dangerous for most humans. As Mr. Rashmi said, cooling demand is projected to rise rapidly in India, due on the one hand to this climate change phenomenon that I've talked about before, but also due to increased incomes. The India Cooling Action Plan is projected that aggregate cooling demand will grow to around 8 times by 2037 or 38 compared to 2017, 2018, with the largest growth in space cooling, but also cold chains and refrigeration. Also, as mentioned before, one of the side effects of this is that annual carbon emissions from cooling could increase over the next 10 years by over 2 times, and they're already relatively high at 8% of India's total greenhouse gases. But more significantly, unless this cooling access gap can be addressed, this could impede India's development objectives as well as its climate goals, and could have adverse impacts on health and productivity and job losses. If we think of this, by 2038, only 40% of households in India will have air conditioning systems, up from the current 8%. In agriculture and healthcare sectors, only 4% of fresh produce is currently covered by cold chains, which leads to significant loss and significant missed opportunities in terms of increased incomes for poor and middle-income farmers. And so clearly, developing an optimal cold chain infrastructure will play a key role in farmer livelihoods, food security, and to a certain extent, as we've seen recently, improving healthcare access. It's also clear that increasing temperatures of the range I talked about before could lead to significant losses of productivity. There are lots of estimates out there between 2.5% and 4.5% of GDP could be at risk by 2030, and that could be a loss of $150 to $250 billion in terms of GDP. At the same time, addressing sustainable cooling could be a key part of a green recovery strategy from COVID, and as a way of driving and supporting Government of India initiatives in manufacturing, like the Made in India initiative. Agriculture cold chains alone have the potential of creating 1.7 million jobs. Servicing, just the servicing of low refrigerant AC units could increase tenfold in the next 2 decades, from 200,000 technicians to 2 million technicians. And I haven't even talked about the opportunities for manufacturing of appliances in India to meet this significant market demand. So I think the important point here is that cooling in India offers a tremendous triple win. And I would reverse the way it's usually described. And I would start with saying it offers a huge economic development opportunity for jobs, better productivity, lower food and medical loss, and greater incomes. Secondly, it provides an opportunity to better adapt to the warmer temperatures that will indeed come from climate change. And then third, it will reduce greenhouse gas emissions from more efficient, low-emitting appliances. The reason I said reverse is that often in the climate world, people start with the reduction of emissions. But I think for a country like India, the economic development opportunities and adaptation opportunities are maybe even more significant. And I'm not discounting the importance of the reduced emissions. Again, as Mr. Rashmi said, India recognized this opportunity early and developed a pioneering India Cooling Action Plan with the overarching goal of providing sustainable cooling and thermal comfort for all, while securing environmental, social, economic benefits for society. It's a comprehensive plan that identifies the diverse needs, makes recommendations across space, cooling in buildings, agriculture, pharmaceutical cold chains, refrigeration, transportation, et cetera, through 2038. And I think that this plan is globally recognized as one of the best in the world, and certainly the most comprehensive, but also very important given the size of India in the space. However, without taking away from this, this is just a plan at this point in time. A lot of thinking, how do we move it forward? Achieving the ICAP goals requires the development of a well-designed, pragmatic implementation plan supported by robust institutional frameworks and timely access to financing and resources. There's a huge opportunity as we move forward to translate this plan into concrete actions and to actually get going with the implementation. I like the reference to the old Nike ad that says, just do it. Question is how do we make that happen? From the World Bank side, we're optimistic that there is a good opportunity that India can, in fact, deliver on this based on its track record. If we look at ESL's track record on LEDs, India's acceleration on renewable energy over the last few years, some of the other energy efficiency stuff that Mr. Rashmi has talked about, there's a track record. So we have a plan, we have a track record. Now, how do we build in the implementation roadmap? So to this end, the World Bank's commissioned a study to develop this actionable roadmap that details the key policy, investment, and financing opportunities, knowledge capacity building, and to support the implementation of the ICAP. This includes proposing interventions that will help operationalize the recommendations, identifying opportunity areas that are critical in sustainable cooling, and the role of demand-side interventions in housing, heat stress in cities, etc., and developing a roadmap and prioritized interventions using multiple criteria covering market size, investment opportunity, savings potential, etc., etc., etc. Today's session will discuss some of these ideas and how we bring it all together. Overall, one of the prime challenges in terms of bringing better, and by that we mean higher energy efficiency, lower greenhouse gas refrigerant air conditioners, is to overcome this initial price hump where they're seen as less competitive compared to other prevalent products. This clearly needs to be addressed, but I think there's a lot of global expertise that shows that well-designed concessional finance facilities have been applied to overcome similar price humps in the past and be used in the future. A second very important lever to move this is to strengthen the policy landscape and to promote convergence, again, as Mr. Rashmi said, at the state, central, and local levels. This could include things like amending and updating the Energy Conservation Act, including guidance for thermal comfort as criteria in the PMAY, supporting implementation of the Energy Conservation Building Code through technical assistance and guidance, and aligning standards and labeling programs with the ICAP. Finally, there are opportunities for demand to be stimulated through procurement, particularly for simple low-cost cooling appliances such as room or ceiling fans, using the model such as the Ujala scheme for LED light bulbs, and also through introducing mandates for the minimum number of such appliances in housing programs such as the PMAY. What is clear, however, and again, a little bit as Mr. Rashmi and others have said, is that there's no one single action or no one single actor that can address this, this cooling challenge. This is going to require a systemic, multi-sectoral, multi-stakeholder response that brings together policies and investments, technology development and rollout, public and private sector, equipment and building designs. And it's not an either or. It will take the deployment of appliances and better building and urban design and revamping of medical and agricultural cold chain. And it will require both high-end technological innovation and the deployment of cost-effective, simpler solutions. Require policy changes and investments. It will require the public sector and the private sector and the civil society working together. In short, it will take a coordinated effort at scale, but if it's successful, it'll bring a lot of benefits both to India and to the world. And so this brings me to one maybe provocative thought. India has a strong track record of implementing decentralized solutions for large-scale complex programs through national missions. Recently, the Jal Jeevan mission, through its first 2 years, has provided tap connections to 57 million households. Under Swachh Bharat, over 600,000 villages have declared themselves open defecation free in 5 years. Question: could a similar mission for cooling help fast-track the implementation of the ICAP roadmap and the cooling agenda in India? I'd like to leave that on the table at this point. In closing, as we move forward, I'd like to congratulate Sheetal to beginning to integrate Indian civil society initiatives into the cooling sector. I'm glad that we're an active member of the UNEP Cooling Coalition, and I'd like to thank them for the collaboration that we've had in the work together. I'd also like to thank Sheetal for organizing the session and engaging with us on this issue. Finally, I'd like to thank TERI and the WSDS Secretariat for providing this platform. With that, thank you, and over to the rest of the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for your words. I would now like to move on to the keynote address by Mr. Jigmet Takpa. Mr. Takpa is an officer of the Indian Forest Service from Jammu Kashmir, Kadar, and is presently serving as the Joint Secretary and heading the decertification cell in the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. He oversees the Montreal Protocol implementation in India, and he is also the nodal person for activities under the Indian Cooling Action Plan. We are excited to have you with us today, sir. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Ashmita. I think I'm audible.
Yes, sir. You're audible. Thank you.
Thank you. Shri RR Rashmi, former Special Secretary, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, and Distinguished Fellow, TERI. Mr. John A Roome, Regional Director, the World Bank. Mr. Abhas Jha, Director General, Bureau of Energy Efficiency. Miss Lily Riahi, Coordinator, Cool Coalition, United Nations Environment Program. Mr. Ashish Fatedar, Chief Operating Officer, National Center for Cold Chain Development. Mr. Gaya Prasad, Deputy Director General, Rural Housing, Ministry of Rural Development. Mr. Sanjay Seth, Senior Director, TERI, and Mr. Richi Mittal, immediate past president, Indian Society of Heating, Refrigeration and Air Conditioning Engineering, and all the eminent participants. I'd like to thank the Sheetal, the World Bank, the Children Investment Fund Foundation, and especially the TERI for organizing today's webinar on the occasion of World Sustainable Development Summit with the theme Financing the Implementation of India Cooling Action Plan. It's a great honor for me to participate in this session as a part of World Sustainable Development Summit 2022. As most of you are aware, Ministry has developed and launched the Indian Cooling Action Plan during the March 2019 with a long-term vision to address the cooling requirement across the sectors. India is among one of the first countries in the world to develop a comprehensive cooling action plan. The Indian Cooling Action Plan, that is ICAP, is an important policy initiative of this ministry, and it has a potential to provide socio-economic and environmental benefit related to reducing refrigerant use, climate change mitigation, and sustainable development goals, and has been appreciated globally at various international fora. The goal in the ICAP proposed that through proactive measures, the total refrigerant demand can be reduced by 25 to 30%, and cooling energy requirement by 25 to 40%, respectively in the year 2037-38. Given the cross-cutting requirement of cooling in multiple sectors, different government department and ministry are linked with the subject of cooling. Accordingly, the development and implementation of ICAP has been an interministerial undertaking. Some action emerging out of ICAP, that is Indian Cooling Action Plan, also required involvement of the state government and urban local bodies for their implementation. These linkages has been captured in the ICAP implementation framework. ICAP has considered the interdependency among the policy intervention and strives to harmonize energy efficiency with the HCFC phase out and high GWP HFC phase down schedule under the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol, which the government has ratified during the September 2021. ICAP has 7 thematic areas comprising of space cooling in building, air conditioning technologies, cold chain and refrigeration, transport air conditioning, refrigeration and air conditioning servicing sector, and the 6th one is the refrigeration demand and indigenous production, and the 7th is the research and development. Each of these thematic areas have a short and medium and long-term recommendation. Working group has been constituted by the ministry for each of the thematic area for evolving action points for implementation of the recommendation for each thematic area through linkages, synergies with various ongoing government programs and schemes. One of the important points to be noted is that the implementation of the recommendation of Indian Cooling Action Plan does not involve any additional budgetary allocation, but it will be through linkages and synergies with various ongoing governmental programs and schemes aimed at providing sustainable cooling and thermal comfort. As a part of implementation, space cooling in building being the most important and which can significantly contribute to achieving the set goal in the ICAP has been prioritized for implementation. The action point for implementation of recommendation for the thematic area space cooling has been finalized through mapping of the recommendation with the ongoing government programs and schemes. A publication of the same along with the action to be taken by different agencies has been launched during September 2021 and disseminated widely, including to all the concerned agencies. Secondly, the thematic group on cold chain and refrigeration is working on the finalization of the action point for implementation of the recommendation in the ICAP. Financing for the cooling solution is a significant challenge. Keeping in view the diversity of the cooling need, from those of urban to poor rural population, from large building to urban slums to rural huts, from human comfort to cooling cold chain for food and vaccine. Each of these required a different financial model, which again is a complex and could be challenging. The potential source of funding will vary according to the likelihood of commercial returns, the local investment climate, and scale of investment and other factors. Noting these challenges, the ministry has decided to follow a collaborative effort for taking incremental steps within the existing policy framework and schemes of the various ministries and departments of the government towards achieving the objectives and goal of ICAP. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir, for your words. We're extremely pleased to have you with us today. I now call upon Mr. Sanjay Seth from TERI for thanking the speakers of the inaugural session and concluding it.
Thank you very much, Ashmita. And it's really a proud privilege for me to be thanking all the speakers of this inaugural session for this very, very important, the session that is being concluded around Sheetal, ICAP. I think business models, as all of the speakers emphasized, that a collaborative action and business models to really be making sure that the India Cooling Action Plan can be integrated within the frameworks of every stakeholder so that it can succeed. So I think I would really like to thank all of the eminent panelists of this inaugural session, starting from with Mr. Rashmi, the former Special Secretary of the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, and currently the Distinguished Fellow in TERI, and the way he emphasized the importance of this sector and its uniqueness for an integrated and a comprehensive approach to make sure that it gets it sees the success that it has been created for. I would also like to thank Mr. John A Roome, the Regional Director of World Bank. And thank you, John, for really, I know it's very early in the morning, and for really making yourself available for this very important session. And of course, World Bank has been a partner for this very, very important action plan that has been put together, the Cooling Action Plan by India, and how alignment of all the climate change climate change initiatives will really see how the success of this program. And cooling demand obviously is, I think, at the central of the climate change objective, and it's really increasingly becoming more and more important as we are seeing the adversities of climate really affecting all of us. And I think your points that you make on driving this on a mission mode, I think is a very, very, very valid suggestion. And I hope that the panel discussion that is following the inaugural session would take note of this, and the Government of India would also see how it could be integrated within the policy frameworks. And since we have the Joint Secretary from the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change here today with us, I'm sure that he would make note of this and we could work together on driving this on a mission mode. Finally, I would like to thank Mr. Jigmet Takpa for making himself available for the inaugural session. We know that these are very pressing times for all the government officials with the financial year coming to an end, and budget sessions have just been rolled out. So we can understand the engagements of all officials. And I thank you very much for coming on the inaugural session, for having delivered your keynote address, and also I think emphasizing how the ICAP has a long-term vision for addressing the cooling demands in a collaborative effort across all ministries and all sectors of the economy. So thank you very much, and I hope that we continue to have your thoughts and suggestions as we move ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. With that, we conclude our inaugural session, and I would move on to the next point agenda. Here, I would like to call upon Mr. Abhas Jha from the World Bank. Mr. Jha is the practice manager for the Climate Change and Disaster Risk Management Division of the South Asia region within the Urban Resilience and Land Global Practice for the World Bank. He leads the global team working on infrastructure lending, technical assistance, and advisory services within the World Bank. Mr. Jha will be presenting their presentation on operationalizing the ICAP, and he will also be the moderator for the panel discussion, which is to follow. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ashmita, and thank you, Mr. Rashmi, Mr. Takpa, and ladies and gentlemen. So let me try and share my screen. Hopefully, everyone can see it.
So can you go on the full mode?
Yeah, I'll do that. Okay. So, so I think I have the benefit of that John made most of the points that I was going to make. So I can spend my 10 minutes or so just reinforcing a few important points. So first of all, it's clear that climate change is already hitting India hard, and in the future, heat is going to be a major problem. I'm sure you saw in the news this year. Yeah, I am on screen, full screen. It's not showing. Is it okay now?
No problem. Can I come in?
Yeah,
Sir,
please
if
carry
you,
on. Mr. Jha, please
if you
carry
have-
on.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. So India is going to be hit very hard by heat in the coming days and years and months. You may have seen the news earlier this year, actually last summer, which was that there was a city in Pakistan named Jacobabad, where the temperature hit 50 degrees centigrade, and that is beyond the capacity of human life to exist. And as John mentioned, we are going to see more and more of these 35-degree plus wet bulb temperature. So wet bulb temperature means the temperature plus the humidity, where human life will become, you cannot survive. Now, the effects of this is going to be enormous. So we will have GDP loss, we'll have loss of productivity, food loss will go up, and even things like vaccines, the losses are going to be of an order of magnitude much larger. Now, currently, there's a huge cooling access gap. So if we were to cover all the households in India, we would need about 3.5 times our current cooling energy use. So from 90 terawatt hours to 326 terawatt hours. Now, I think John mentioned this study. So this is a study that came out a year ago in the magazine, in the journal Science, by Professor El Tahir of MIT and others. And you can see that the entire Indo-Gangetic plain is going to have a significant number of 35-degree plus wet bulb temperature days in the coming days. And the table on the chart on the map on the right shows the high scenario, high emission scenario. But even in the low emission scenario, the number of 35-degree plus days goes up quite significantly. So it is going to be a major problem. And with the numbers show that by 2030, 160 to 200 million people are going to be exposed to lethal heat waves in India. Now, under the business as usual scenario, if we start to plug the gap on cooling, it's going to be an enormous strain on both from the energy point of view, from the refrigerant point of view, from carbon emissions. There is this interesting statistic from the International Energy Agency, where they estimated that out until 2050, every second 10 air conditioners are going to be sold. I mean, this is globally, not just India. And this increase in demand for air conditioning, a significant part of it is going to come from India and China. So if we don't get this part right, this is going to have a significant negative impact on the global goals to keep warming below 1.5 degrees centigrade. But at the same time, as John mentioned, this is also an opportunity for India. And there are success stories that we could try and replicate. Obviously, EESL is and the LED bulb story is a great success story. The question is, can we expand that to other sectors? So I would say that multiple frequency, high energy efficiency ceiling fans would be an obvious next step in trying to expand this bulk procurement and demand aggregation model that EESL has. There's a huge potential for jobs in this sector. So you will need a large number of technicians. There'll be a large number of factories that will be needed for this, producing these low GWP refrigerants. You have schemes like the production-linked incentive, the PLI, Atmanirbhar Bharat, Make in India. These all could incentivize a shift towards low GWP refrigerants, high energy efficiency cooling in India. Now, I think the India cooling action plan is really a global best practice, and the government of India has to be commended for producing such a forward-thinking document. Now, the World Bank has been working on preparing an action plan in how do you operationalize this cooling action plan, in that identifying the policy and regulatory steps that will be needed, the finance that will be needed to bring in the private sector and to significantly move the needle on the key actions that are outlined in the ICAP. So the purpose of this session is really to get some feedback from you in terms of how we can take this forward. Now, the greatest demand growth will be in demand will be in the space cooling, and India, along with South Asia and along with Africa, is the fastest urbanizing regions in the world, and much of the infrastructure is yet to be built, the urban infrastructure. So that is an opportunity, but it's also a threat. If we get it right, then the gains will be tremendous. But if we get it wrong, we will be locked into a very, very negative path, which will be hard to get out of. So as the slide shows, 74% of the total cooling demand will be coming from buildings, of which 2 billion square meters will be commercial and 9 billion square meters will be urban residential. I think there's a huge...
I would just like to interrupt. Your slide still shows the first title page. So
that's weird. I don't know what's going on.
So we can still see your title right now.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe it was in the slideshow that. Okay, good. So, so as I was saying, I think the affordable housing sector offers a lot of opportunity here. And just to give you one example, the PMAY scheme that produces up to 10 million units of affordable housing. And if we can get that part right, and certainly air conditioning is a big part of it, but it's I think not the majority concern, because most people will not have access to air conditioning. So we have to think about measures like passive cooling, use of appropriate local building materials. And I want to share a story here. So when I was a district administrator in the state of Bihar, undivided Bihar, which is now Jharkhand, in the tribal areas, when we would implement these affordable housing programs called, like, for example, at that time it used to be called the Indra Awas Yojana, the tribals did not want brick and mortar houses. And yet, the guidelines did not allow for using local building materials. So what would happen is that these houses would be built, and then the tribals would tie their cattle in those houses. They would refuse to live in them. So I think this actually, I think it's still a problem. And in guidelines for schemes like PMAY, we need to think about how we can incentivize the use of local building materials, which will not only be climate friendly, but it will also have a good impact on passive cooling. Okay, so just to sum up, so that on space cooling, the real opportunities are on reducing the demand through passive cooling measures, through integration of these affordable housing schemes of Government of India, to improve the efficiency through bulk procurement like the ESCL scheme on super efficient ACs, but also on fans. We can think of shifting demand. So our colleagues in the IFC, in the International Finance Corporation, have just started the first district cooling system in India through a company called Tabreed. So that scheme was approved about a month ago. So and hopefully we'll see many more of these district cooling schemes. And then finally, on the whole urbanization process, it's important to think about nature-based solutions. So there was a study a couple of years ago that showed that planting trees in neighborhoods can reduce the temperature, outside temperature, by 5 to 6 degrees. So that is also a very valuable part of the cooling agenda. Then the whole issue of the cold chain and refrigeration. So currently only 4% of produce in India is covered by cold chains, and there are huge gaps. So 97% pack houses, 85% of the reefers, and 91% of ripening chambers. So there is a clear gap here. The question I would have is that why isn't the private sector stepping in? What are the obstacles to private sector investment in this area where there's clearly so much demand? So again, here, there is a need to develop the cold chain infrastructure from, as they say, from farm to fork. There is a huge opportunity to improve efficiency in the domestic and commercial refrigeration sector. And then better operation and service is also part of this. And here, I think the training and the jobs, bringing in the polytechnics to train a large cohort of technicians would again be a very good opportunity. Transport, again, mobile air conditioning, it's actually the coverage is very low. And I think more and more we will need to shift our attention to things like public transport on buses and railways. And how can we cool these in the most efficient manner? The refrigerant demand in this sector is expected to grow by four times. So I think I can skip this and then just turn to the refrigerants. So there are, as Mr. Takpa said, India is a signatory to the Kigali Amendment to the Kyoto Protocol. The annual refrigerant demand is projected to grow more than 6 times. So India has been doing a good job in phasing out HCFC. But the question is that can these lower GWP refrigerants, can more and more of this be produced in India and become an opportunity for jobs? I think there is a huge opportunity there. So again, here the opportunities would be to promote the domestic supply of low GWP refrigerants, increase the deployment through things like branding, star ratings in these fridges and air conditioners, and then also by reducing the demand for refrigerants through proper servicing, maintenance, recovery, recycling, and so on. So that is it. And so I guess we go to the panel discussion now.
Yes, sir.
So if I could dive straight in. So if I could turn to Ms. Lily Riahi first, who's the coordinator for the Cool Coalition for UNEP. So Lily, my question to you would be that tell us a little bit about the Cool Coalition and what you do. And then given this huge agenda that we're seeing, how do partners of the Government of India, the development partners, all of us, how can we best collaborate to push this agenda forward to support the Government of India in its efforts? So Lily, over to you.
Thank you so much. Let me, distinguished guests and participants, first let me say thank you for having me at the 21st edition of the World Sustainable Development Summit. And big congratulations to TERI, the World Bank, CIF for organizing this important event. It's really great to hear the findings of the World Bank Group study to operationalize the ICAP and identify additional financing opportunities, including for demand side interventions like heat stress or passive cooling and cold chain as well. So, well, ladies and gentlemen, at the global level, the key concerns we see are that more than 1 billion people are at high risk because they don't have access to cooling. And another 2.3 billion do not have access to sustainable cooling. So together, this means that cooling options for nearly half of the world's population are either non-existent or inadequate. As you mentioned, Abbas, you said by 2050, every 10 seconds an air conditioner will be sold, and that's just space cooling. We know from the same IEA report that that's going to be the equivalent of the power consumption of India and China combined. That's how much just space cooling will demand of our power system. So that will completely undercut our efforts for the energy transition. We've seen in the last few years the amount of residential air conditioning demand on the grid has outpaced the amount of new solar capacity being added on the grid. So that tells you it's also going to undermine our energy transition. And of course, left unchecked, the emissions are going to skyrocket. Just in the next 10 years, they will double from what we see today, which is about 7%. We really clearly have to do something. And as John Roome said earlier, no one actor will be able to tackle this alone. We'll need a multi-sectoral, multi-stakeholder systemic response. And that's actually exactly why we launched the UNEP Cool Coalition together with partners like the World Bank Group, IEA, SCFROL, Denmark, and others, as an official outcome of the UN Climate Action Summit. Mainly to take coordinated action and to support countries in this transition. The coalition, through its 100+ members, is collaborating on science, on policy, on finance, technology globally, and accelerating the transition to sustainable cooling through joint action, knowledge exchange, and advocacy. What is also important to say is that according to the UNEP IEA synthesis report, such coordinated international action to move to efficient climate-friendly cooling can allow us to avoid 4 to 8 years of global GHG emissions. So the opportunity is quite huge. And what is clear globally and in India is that low-cost financing will have a very key role to play. We know investment for this huge growth will ultimately sit on the shoulders of households, farmer groups, private sector. But low-cost financing tied to robust policy can really nudge growth onto a sustainable trajectory. And so to do this, to drive low-cost financing in the cooling sector, I see 3 key areas of action that we could focus on as a community. One would be, of course, efficient buildings and ACs in the residential sector. I mean, in light of the demand and the figures we've heard, this is one key area of action. The second is low cost, no regret solutions to be scaled up in cities. And the third is really overcoming CapEx and capacity barriers for larger scale, integrated, sort of cross-sectoral cooling infrastructure projects. So financing efficiency in the residential sector. Well, the major issue here, I think speakers before me already alluded to this, is obviously the first cost bias, where you see obviously the many households not being willing or unable to pay a premium for efficiency, whether it's a super efficient fan or an AC or a green home. And the second is the split incentives. So developers are not responsible for the long-term use and the associated energy bills of a building or of a development, so the incentives don't exist for efficiency in this sector. So we know from the ICAP that households with AC will grow 10% from 10% today to over 40% in the next 20 years. And as was pointed out earlier, the housing stock will more than double. So addressing these two issues in India is, of course, of paramount importance. And efficiency standards and building codes will certainly shift the market, but low-cost financing targeting those first-time buyers who can finally afford AC or a well-built home is really going to be key. And I fully agree with the analysis just presented that affordable housing is a huge opportunity, and we'll really need to drive efficiency and thermal comfort into affordable housing through low-cost financing for end consumers and developers, maybe linked to green buildings or innovative models for ACs and fans like on-bill financing backed by low interest credit. The second is, I mentioned, was low cost, no regret solutions in cities. So obviously we've heard that India is arguably the most heat stressed country, and its cities will just become hotter over the next decades. We heard this will be having impacts not only in terms of lethal heat waves, but also GDP and jobs for the Indian economy. And we know globally as well that space cooling is predicted to jump 300% in the next decades, largely in urban areas. So in the recent UNEP publication, Beat the Heat, which is a handbook for urban cooling in cities, we identified several low-cost, no-regret measures that cities can take today to address urban heat and cut cooling demand growth, such as urban greening, cool roofs, surfaces, improved urban design, passive cooling. These measures that were also mentioned in the World Bank study. But well, it's a bit complicated because there's not really a return on investment for tree planting or cool surfaces. So we have to get creative and look for financing options such as, land value capture, local taxes, revolving funds, CSR funds. The handbook highlights some of these options. And beyond these, we can evaluate cities' available budgets and capacity to implement, urban green projects or heat resilient planning in their local area plan. So that's why UNEP, together with RMI, with support of Denmark, are working with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs and NIUA as part of our broad support to MOEFCC in the ICAP implementation by establishing an urban cooling program that will aim to support 10 pilot cities and eventually reach 100 cities. And front and center of the program will be helping these cities to deliver such low-cost, no-regret solutions, and the low-cost financing will be really key. And third, as mentioned, was overcoming the CapEx and capacity barriers for the larger integrated and infrastructure projects for cooling. I think ICAP has also prioritized the rapid expansion of these kinds of projects, such as, for example, integrated cold chain and district cooling. We always hear the saying, banks have the low-cost credit, but they're not seeing the fast-paced, they're not seeing the projects, and so that's why we're not seeing really the fast-paced investment needed in these kinds of complex infrastructure projects. And to unlock that finance, we need to incubate projects and business models, build capacity, including project handholding, and provide grants to support the upstream project development costs for these projects that may have upfront capex, but are really not more expensive in the life cycle. So central government guidance and enabling frameworks for these projects is really key, and I really want to commend the Bureau of Energy Efficiency for developing a district cooling code and standard guidelines, such as for pack houses. These will be very important. Similarly, UNEP and partners of the District Energy Initiative have been promoting district cooling in India since 2016. And last month, we were really happy to hear that one of the pilot cities, Hyderabad Pharma City, issued a tender for a 125,000 refrigeration ton district cooling project. And the leadership and the level of effort of the state government to drive this project forward and deliver this RFP is really remarkable. And with the right capacity support and grant funds, the community can really build that same kind of effort with other leading cities across India, including with support of BEE, Mahua, and ESL. And last, we are also working with AEEE, Alliance for Energy Efficient Economy, and ESL to scale up investment in clean and integrated cold chain. And again, here, it's really combining the central and state policy measures with also innovative business models and low-cost finance and capacity support to businesses to really drive packhouse development that are efficient and integrated in a cold chain. So we look forward here to work closely with BEE and NCCD on this project and convert the learnings to national policy and guidance. So to summarize, I mean, all our efforts on advocacy, on capacity building and policy and innovation are really critical to target and to unlock low-cost finance so that we can really drive impact and achieve the goals of the India Cooling Action Plan. UNEP and also the Cool Coalition stands ready to build partnerships, address these knowledge gaps, and raise awareness through targeted programs in India on with partners, hand in hand with the finance community and industry. Thank you. I invite all of you to join us and the Cool Coalition and to support this effort. And thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to address this distinguished audience. Over.
Thank you so much, Lily. Those were really excellent points. And what struck me when you talked about cities and issues like land value capture, you know, the old saying that to issue a green bond, you first need to be able to issue a bond. So you need to get your basic housekeeping in order, you know, things like own source revenue, land value capture, you know, removing the distortions in land markets. Those will be key to the next stage of accessing finance for some of these critical issues for cities. So points well taken. And again, I want to reiterate that we would very much like to work with UNEP and the Coal Coalition as we move this important agenda forward in India. So let me turn to Mr. Arjit Sen Gupta, who's the director in the Bureau of Energy Efficiency. And Arjit, you know, I have a simple question, which is that, as you saw in the analysis, there's a huge opportunity, right? There are big gaps in investments. So why isn't the private sector, and we are seeing it, why is the private sector stepping up? And, you know, why aren't, you know, the big companies in India, why aren't they lining up to make a profit in this sector? So what are we missing? What are the barriers to investment? Over to you.
Thank you, Abhas, for this question. And of course, at the outset, I would also like to thank the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, CITAL, the World Bank, and of course, TERI for organizing this important webinar on this very pertinent subject under this framework of World Sustainable Development Summit 2022. So without further ado, maybe just to brief about the Bureau of Energy Efficiency's effort in promoting thermal comfort. Of course, all of you must be aware about the fact that the Bureau of Energy Efficiency has launched the standards and labeling scheme with an aim to reduce the active cooling load through labeling of air conditioners and refrigerators. At the same time, we have also been able to address the thermal comfort of through the reducing the passive load through the energy efficiency building code for commercial buildings. And now we have also come up with the energy efficiency building code for residential buildings. So these are those things which the Bureau has been doing for the last decade or so, and we have been quite successful in promoting energy efficiency in the appliances sector and also in the building sector, focusing on the cooling aspect of buildings. Recently, as Lily was mentioning, the Bureau has also ventured into the cold chain domain and also into the district cooling area. So as far as the cold chain is concerned, so along with the World Bank, we have prepared a report focusing on the pack houses, and which is expected to be in the public domain very soon. And in fact, we have gone ahead with some of the recommendations of that cold chain report, and we are in the process of coming up with the operation and maintenance guidelines, and also as Lily mentioned, the backhouse design guidelines. So as far as the district cooling is concerned, again, the Bureau along with the GIZ has initiated development of a district cooling code, carrying forward the work that was started by UNEP along with ESL. So that's where we are currently standing. Now coming to the bigger picture of space cooling and the need to address the challenges that is being posed by space cooling. We have already heard a lot of speakers speaking about the need for space cooling, and I think sustainable cooling will be the way ahead. Even if we look in the global context, this year the G20 presidency is with Indonesia. Next year it will be with India, followed by Brazil. So these three countries are those countries where the cooling need is on the higher side. So I mean, we can easily say that whatever we do or discuss on the cooling front will save the global agenda also to a certain extent, keeping in view the fact that the G20 presidency is going to be in these tropical countries starting from this year till 2024. Now coming to your question of yes, investment, we have seen a lot of reports which have highlighted the fact that there is a lot of potential as far as investment is concerned. But yes, there are some of the challenges which we have also seen as far as investment is concerned, in space cooling is concerned. So now, first of all, of course, is the high upfront cost. So their consumers have often faced this issue, not so much in the urban areas, but yes, if we look at in the Indian context, the penetration of air conditioners is still on the lower side in the rural areas. So maybe I mean that is one of the barrier that is affecting the penetration of air conditioners in the rural areas as well. And even if we see in the average sales, it is the 3-star air conditioners which has seen the highest sales in the market. So definitely that is one of the barrier. Then there is of course lack of access to finance. So I mean that we are all aware that yes, we don't get if somebody else wants to invest in some projects which can address the challenge of space cooling, be it projects like district cooling or the cold chain infrastructure. Maybe a third party, it is very difficult for a third party to come and invest because of the lack of access to finance. And then of course there is a lack of trust in new technologies. And then there are competing investment priorities. So that often is something which is affecting investment in the space cooling domain. But recently, if we've seen the good thing that has happened is if we look at the budget announcement made by the government of India on 1st of February this year. So the Honorable Finance Minister has talked about promoting energy savings through this energy service companies mode, the ESCO mode in commercial buildings. And this is in fact the first time I mean, in the history of the budget announcement that such a thing has been mentioned as part of the budget announcements. And I think it provides a lot of encouragement for this sector, and hopefully the barriers, the challenges which we often talk about to promote investment in the domain of space cooling will really see the kind of light that we wanted them to see with this kind of announcements. So yes, these are some of the challenges that we are facing, due to which investment is lacking in the space cooling domain. But recent announcements and recent developments hopefully will trigger investment towards the space cooling sector, and we'll see a lot of developments in the years to come. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Arjit. Those were very salient points. So now we have the challenge that we have about 17 minutes and we have 4 speakers left. So let's try, and if I could request the remaining speakers to limit yourselves to 4 to 5 minutes, that would be much appreciated. So I'm going to next call on Mr. Uma Maheshwaran Rajshekhar, who is the Senior Advisor to the National Institute of Urban Affairs. So Mr. Rajshekhar, if I could ask you on this issue of urbanization in India. So India is one of the fastest urbanizing countries in the world. Much of that urbanization is unplanned. So given that situation, and there is a lack of capacity at the local government level for basic planning, basic financial management. So what can the government of India do to rectify the situation in the context of cooling? Over to you, and urban heat. Yes, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Jha. Of course, cities across India, uh, they do face various challenges, and one of the biggest challenges, how do they build the capacity of their existing staff, but also make sure that the new staff do get the necessary, training and capacity building to integrate within their existing system, but also to take up some of these new and emerging technologies. So there are a couple of things, rather than talking about the challenges, I'm sure all within this particular forum know about many of the challenges related to training and capacity building. But I want to highlight a few things, initiatives which have been taken by the ministry and also supported by NIUA. The first and foremost thing is how do we engage them? And this during this pandemic, I think we saw a huge response in people participating in an online medium. Earlier, we used to call up people for a 2-day event and provide training to senior officials. But now, with the availability of online technology and more people getting used to it, we were able to scale up a lot of our training and capacity building across all the cities. And more number of people also from each of these cities can still attend these events, take part in these training and capacity building mechanisms, and so on and so forth. So, which is a very good platform moving forward. Probably not a whole day event, but these small, short training and capacity building, which can last for 2 hours to 4 hours, provide a good opportunity to engage with city officials. The second thing is how do we make sure that the training and capacity building they undertake also provide a mechanism for them to move within the municipal systems. So new certification programs have been introduced, and how we can give uh, or value to these certifications rather than this being a piece of paper, whether it can help them in their promotion, whether they can be given more tasks, more additional responsibilities, and also in moving across various departments within the municipal corporation. So that's something which we have been working on, and we've been able to do it for some of these courses. And I think that's something which is going to pan up, very rapidly, given the interest we have been able to see from the municipal officials. The third thing is how do we develop different training for different people? One training fits all doesn't really work, even though it's a training for urban planning or training for, urban heat island and training for, some of the new technological innovations such as district cooling systems and so on and so forth. We are right now working towards leadership training program, which can concentrate how do we, inculcate the mechanism of developing something for senior city officials. And also, this should be integrated with some kind of, them going back to their cities and implementing it in a short or a small scale, so that it's a win-win situation. And once these pilot work, I think it builds confidence not only to us, but also to the city to take it up and scale it, because the municipal budget is quite large compared to the extent of gap funding which the central ministry is currently providing. And the fourth key thing, which is the National Urban Learning Platform, which has been established. So how do we integrate all these smaller things, and how do we see who's taking the training, who's showing interest in it, and how many number of people we can reach out over a long period of time in a sustainable manner. Earlier, all the training were taken by a few people, and we never had an idea about who's getting trained, in which areas they are getting trained. So right now, with the establishment of National Urban Learning Platform, we are able to track who's getting trained on what topics, and then we are able to see through not only in them getting certification, but also follow up with them in terms of seeing how far they are able to implement some of their learnings in their own city. So I'll stop here, but we'll be glad to take up a few questions during the discussions. Thank you, Mr. Jha.
Thank you, Dr. Rachekar, for these very, very good points. So I'm going to then turn to Mr. Photedar, who's the Chief Operating Officer of the National Center for Cold Chain Development. So, Mr. Photedar, if you could just give us a brief overview of what the government of India and what is happening on cold chain development, where are the key gaps, and how this action plan will help you in your efforts. Over to you.
A very good afternoon to all the distinguished guests. Let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Ashish Photodar, born and brought up in Kashmir. This is my 23rd year in the cold chain sector. I'm a mechanical engineer, and my experience is in designing, sales, marketing, revenue generation, operations in the cold chain sector. I thank you, TERI, and all the esteemed organizations for inviting me to this webinar, and I would be speaking today about 2-3 things mostly. So the first thing is, promoting cold chain infrastructure through the facilitative framework, which, what are the government initiatives. So the facilitative framework is basically the present dispensation of resources, policies, which are effective guidance to the development of cold chain infrastructure. Let's first understand what has been the impact of COVID-19 on the make it relevant. The outbreak of COVID-19 and its fallouts like lockdown and near zero human-to-human interface led to the onslaught on nations across the globe, with India being no exception. The pandemic's threatening impact in various sectors also hit deep disruption in the global supply chain system. The present framework for promoting and development of cold chain is in place from so many years and has been constantly upgraded through various schemes and initiatives. These initiatives are based upon an open-ended platform which allows the ways and resources plus technologies to be easily accessible for the cold chain industry today. To obtain this knowledge, industry has been approaching the think tanks who are facilitating the throughput of knowledge in a framework. This framework is very defined and set up through various channels, agencies for the constant development of cold chain. The present time is now pushing us all to promote cold chain infra based upon technology, energy, and climatic approach. Consequently, present framework needs upgradation in support to this direction, which is the need of the hour. And all related agencies are doing their bit to mentor and motivate people to follow and accept the necessary changes for a greater development of cold chain infrastructure. This knowledge as such can be obtained on its own also, since the present framework has the required elasticity in order to accommodate the necessary changes. In today's era and after the pandemic hit us, all the overall system and the thought process have shifted to a new axis, which is uncertain, challenging, but brings prospects of growth and development with the responsibility. The present framework for developmental process of cold chain has been devised and follows stages such as the awareness, groundwork or planning, operational stages, and the decentralized approach the government is following in its initiatives, value addition stage, and the analysis and the follow-up stage. The awareness is the most important part of all this. The pandemic's threatening impact on the economic and the industrial stability has led to major distress in the various sectors and deep disruption in the global coal supply chain system, as I've already said in the beginning of my speech. It would be unfair to not point out that the rising distress has affected the consumers. However, they became conscious of their eating habits, and their awareness level towards the health, wellness, and consumption of proteins, etc., to counter side effects of pandemic has resulted in increased consumption of milk and dairy products, fruits and green vegetables, and products like meat, egg, and seafood. The consumption of fruits and vegetables, meat, and eggs saw a major surge during these times, and distributors, producers started to indulge in the process of understanding the importance of cold chain. The industry also took a challenge within, and with all its resources, they allowed timely pickups and deliveries of all food and perishable fruit, veggies, and meats. It allowed people safety and a system where deliveries were made at home with the minimum or no risk. With increased pressure from the secondary markets, it became very evident and necessary to ramp up the cold storage capacities as well as the cold chain transport. This could be made possible easily since the present framework facilitates the incorporation of the surge action. However, what we have learned also, and we all are working towards, is our concentrated effort in mobilizing technology, which has to be conscious of energy conservation and energy efficiency. It should also ensure effective climate control and reduction in the carbon footprint, which obviously is a point of concern. There are incentives for using renewable energy in cold chain sector, and people need to be made more aware of this. And there are the stages like the planning stages, which ensure sustainable use of resources and developing the cold chain in the same framework, and the interventions by the government on this. Then there is a facilitative growth approach, which is basically which allows the capacity built up. And there are bottlenecks in the process, but we are aware of these bottlenecks, and we are trying to remove these bottlenecks. And this has been further eased by decentralizing the policy.
Mr. Fatehdar, sorry to interrupt, but could you wrap up in like 30 seconds because we have 2 more speakers?
Okay. And the present framework allows states and all district levels to promote schemes and initiatives for the purpose of connecting the last mile in this cold chain. So my, we have, what I understand is now there are developmental perspectives and challenges in this sector. But now with the government with this initiatives of incentivizing the cold chain sector is one big step in pushing the growth of cold chain infrastructure. The government further announced its intent by announcing the India Cooling Action Plan, and now with PM Gati Shakti, which is a digital unification of logistics services, there will be surely an added advantage in terms of the development of the cold chain, and it should also address climate as far as indirect emission is concerned, and will bring benefits to climate. And I think real-time tracking would also add value to the development of cold chain sector. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Fatehдар. So I'm going to turn to Mr. Richie Mittal now, who was the immediate past president of the Indian Society of Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning Engineers. So, Mr. Mittal, if you could very briefly give your thoughts on how does India become a global hub, a global manufacturing hub for clean refrigerants, like we discussed, and also on the skills needed. How do we ramp up the huge training needs that will need to accompany this kind of push? So over to you, Mr. Mittal.
Thank you, Mr. Jha. And first of all, I'm sorry, I think we're tight on the time, but still I would like to thank TERI, Children Investment Fund, Sheetal, and World Bank to invite ISHRE on their platform of World Sustainable Development Summit. It's a great opportunity for us. I just want to take a minute to speak about ISHRE. ISHRE is the Indian Society of Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning Engineers. We are 44 chapters spread all over India. It's a society of engineers which is working in the field of air conditioning, refrigeration, and ventilation. So just to give you a quick brief, that ISHRE has a lot of technical groups where we have refrigeration committee, we have environment protection committee, we have district cooling committee, and so on, multiple committees where we write white papers, we conduct workshops, we do training, and we do sharing with our members. So I think that is the main focus, and I think that is where we can bring a lot of help to everyone here. Just I will run 2-3 points that how do we bring on to low GP refrigerant into systems. So I would divide it into 3 parts. One is incentivize the whole process, then regulatory, and then R&D. So in industry, role in adoption of low government can be influenced by incentivizing the adoption of low GWP refrigerant in the same way as ozone cell has for adoption of zero ODS refrigerant. So any company for that matter, if they can prove their capability of low GWP, they can be given incentive or subsidy for that matter. That is one. Also, we can look at another option of subsidizing the drop in GWP between the old and new refrigerant. There could be multiple ways of doing it. I don't want to. I had made a good points, but I know time is short. But I'm just giving you the concept. So, since the low GWP are now covered under Montreal Protocol after the Kigali amendment, this will come under ozone cell very soon, and they will take the lead. I'm very sure. Further, taking on Mr. Arjit Sen from BE, that BE can set up standard and labeling program to rate on the low GWP refrigerant also as a green rating system, and then incentivizing the green equipment producing and sales by having low ESG applicable green. So that's another point that I would like to make. Regulatory again is a concept which we can look at. BIS can develop a green standard for application-based refrigerant for room AC in the government tenders and the green standards, and we can work with the government in that. Last is R&D. I'm sorry, I'm going a little too very fast because I could see the time ticking up. The government can speak to IIT and other institute like CSL to come up with blends of low GWP. I think there's a lot of work already happening on this, but at the same time, for commercial establishment, commercial blending can be done, which could be easily available to the market. So I had a lot of other points, but I'm sorry, I think we're tight on the time, so I'll stop here. Thank you very much again for inviting
thank you so much for being so brief, but with so many good points. And I think this will need a different and separate discussion because there's such a rich agenda. But thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And so I'll turn to Mr. Sanjay Seth, who's the Senior Director at TERI, and he has a wealth of experience in the Bureau of Energy Efficiency and other agencies. So Mr. Seth, if I could ask you this question on thermal cooling, and especially in the context of schemes like PMAY, what will it take to make this happen, where this thermal cooling is an integral part of the whole process of these affordable housing schemes? So over to you.
Thanks, Abhas, and I also understand the compulsions of time on this. And I think what you probably are intending to say is the thermal comforts in the affordable housing segment. And if you look at the very definition of a house, it's for providing safety and comforts, right? And if the comforts are not there, I think we are missing the missing the agenda. So to my mind, while there is a very a scheme that has been run by the government as far as the the housing for all scheme for affordable housing, somewhere I think the thermal comfort bit is kind of not integrated as much as we would have wanted it to be. And that's the area, I think, where the entire stress needs to be laid out on, and the work that we do in TERI. And in fact, we are now working as a knowledge partner with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs to drive this thermal comforts integrated within the design, within the design process. We must also understand that, when we're talking about the economically weaker sections of people, they may not have the luxury of kind of affording an air conditioning. But with the rising incomes, as they are able to afford it, and the efficiencies and prices of air conditioning coming down, they should not be why should they not have the privilege of maybe putting in an air conditioner in their homes? And I think the entire agenda needs to be looked at from that perspective, because after all, the heat stress on any human being is the same for you and for me. I mean, not even for the economically weaker sections. They also feel that they need to be comfortable. And with that, if they were to put an air conditioning, maybe through schemes of the government, if they are there where they are able to afford it and put it within their houses, at least their operating costs would be very minimal, which would not really hit their pockets. And I think that is the entire agenda which we need to. And one of the areas that we think is very, very important to make sure that your designs that the affordable housing segment provides should integrate sustainability within the the design concepts, so that their dependence on artificial technologies or artificial cooling and lighting, I think that should be minimized. That is the area that we are working on. So we are working on materials, we are working on design, we are working on making sure that, and at the end of it, one of the key things that I've always felt that ultimately is the end user who needs to demand for all of this. And if they don't demand this, people will never give it to them. And I think that's the most important thing, that you need to work with the communities at large to kind of get them on speed as to what really they should be looking at. And it is not the first cost which is really kind of not helping them to get there. So we could discuss this at length. This is a very important subject, very close to our hearts, and maybe another opportunity. I think this is a opportunity missed, but maybe I look forward, Abhas, in the future and of course, many of the panelists, I've had the privilege of working with them. I look forward to continued engagements with them, and look forward to making sure that we are able to contribute to this agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And as you said, this is a very rich agenda. We'll have to have a separate discussion, and each of them we could go through the whole day on things like appropriate building materials and so on. So thank you so much to you and to all the panelists. This was an excellent discussion. I'm sorry that we were so constrained by time, but again, this is hopefully the first of several discussions on this topic. So let me turn it back to Ashish Saraswat of TERI.
So I think, Abhas, Okay, Ashish, are you there? Okay, yeah.
Yes, I'm there, sir.
Yeah.
So thank you, Abhas, sir. And on behalf of the TERI, the Energy and Resources Institute, I would like to add my thanks to WSDS Secretariat and for hosting this important event. And I also want to thank our moderator, Mr. Abhas Jha from World Bank, for your leadership and the way you have managed the agenda and fostered a spirit of collaboration and partnership. I also thank our speakers from World Bank and from Bureau of Energy Efficiency, Mr. Arijit Sen Gupta, Director, Bureau of Energy Efficiency, Dr. Uma Maheshwaran Shashekar, Chair, Urban Resilience, Global Resilient Cities Network, Mr. Ashish Fotedar, Chief Operating Officer, National Center for Cold Chain Development, Ms. Lily Riahi, Coordinator, Cool Coalition, United Nations Environment Program, Mr. Rishi Mittal, Immediate Past President Ishray, and to our director of project director of Sheetal and senior director sustainable buildings Sanjay Seth sir, TERI, for your insightful thoughts on space cooling in buildings, cold chains, refrigeration and refrigerant transition, and many more issues that are linked to the sustainable cooling part. So TERI has been promoting environment-friendly cooling at international and national levels to encourage actors to bundle the implementation strategies pursued into one coherent vision. TERI's experience working with World Bank, civil societies, and philanthropies have shown that the coherent vision is a powerful tool for climate-friendly cooling. And in the last, let me thank all my team at TERI, WSDS team, Ashmita, Gaurav, Shivam, Shan, and Anuradha Sonali for their sincere efforts in making this event very successful. I once again thank all my speakers and request to call off this event.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.